Hey, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? So good to see all of you. Hey, Brett, thank you so much for joining and becoming a member. Hey, Shelby. Hey, Tech Death. Good to see you, John. Hey, Michelle. So good you made it. Hey, Libra Scales M2. Good to have you with us. Hey, Lynn. Hey, Rosewood. Doing good, Rosewood. Thank you. Hey, CJK. Always good to have you here. I hope you guys are excited. I have a really special guest with us tonight, and I have Ash Patino from Ashes to Ash TV. She has an amazing channel. We've talked a little bit about it the last couple of lives, so I'm really anxious for you guys to meet her, and we can all discuss Robert B. and some of the things that Ash does behind the scenes, because I think it's really important that we all understand kind of what happens behind the scenes on some of these cases. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring, I have Shelby on with me again tonight, and I have Ash. Everyone welcome Ash Patino to our live.
Thanks.
Hey, Ash, good to see you.
Thank you.
Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be on. I appreciate you asking for the interview.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm a huge fan, have been for a while. I know Shelby is too. Mary Jackson, you're just going to see my voice and Shelby's voice. Ash is actually on camera, so you can actually see her, or you should be able to. So yeah, Ash, why don't you start by telling us a little bit of how you got into doing what you do?
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, I think originally I was always just into true crime and, scary kind of content. Growing up, I watched Forensics Files. Even still to this day, I'll fall asleep watching Forensics Files on HLN. And through that and some other true crime shows I really had enjoyed watching, a friend of mine recommended the podcast Sword and Scale. And that's when I realized that there was a whole, different type of media being created around true crime. And that led me to the show Up and Vanished, which is an investigative true crime podcast. And that guy did a podcast, and I thought I could do the same thing, but make an actual video series. And what I loved about what Payne Lindsay was doing on that one is I believe he actually had an impact on that case. And I think he's a huge reason of why that case he first worked on got solved. And so I thought, if he can do that, why can't I try to do that too and impact another case? So that's really kind of why I wanted to get into it.
That's amazing. It's just awesome. And each on your channel and on your actual website that you actually cover one case for an entire season, correct?
Yeah, that's how we've had it structured. So that really gives us the time to kind of flesh out all the evidence, to look at everything, because a lot of times there's some giant myths surrounding these cases. Other times you find out things you thought were false are actually true. And so we try to go through each one of those things that we've heard about each case to see how likely it is that that's true or false. And I think that really helps people get a chance to look at all the evidence, obviously see our interpretation of that evidence, but it gives them also a chance to make up their mind for themselves. I mean, just because we start to come to certain conclusions doesn't mean somebody else has to. And that's why we showcase our work and how we're getting our information and what our information is, so that people can see it for themselves and decide.
So your first season was the Carolyn Blankenship case, was that, or Blankenfeld?
Yeah.
Thanks. I went to school with a Blankenship. That's why I said that.
Very close.
And so, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about that case and why you chose to do that one first?
Actually, oddly enough, that's season 2, Carolyn Blankenfeld,
Okay.
and
What's
I was
season 1?
So it goes Robert B. season 1, Carolyn Blankenfeld 2, and then
That's right.
Kendrick Johnson 3.
Okay,
So,
I had them backwards.
yeah, no. It's that's fine because it's actually really interesting, right? You would have thought I would have started with Carolyn Blankenfeld because Carolyn's actually my aunt, and there was some really suspicious circumstances surrounding her death. When I first heard about how she died, I became very curious about it. I had already started the Robert B. case, so I hadn't really decided for sure if it was a case I would take on because it had to do with my own family. And throughout my work on the Robert B. case and gaining confidence that way, one of the family members of Carolyn, another family member, reached out to me and asked me to help her take on the case. And it just seemed right. And I was curious about where the evidence was on that case and if it was likely that she was murdered or if it was an accident. And I think our findings pretty clearly showed that it wasn't an accident. And I kind of thought to myself, because I didn't want to do it at first because I was afraid I was going to tear my family in half. And I finally just decided that it was worth that risk. And it did, unfortunately, I feel like tear my family in half. But one thing I think is important for people who watch my show is one thing I refuse to do is bury my head in the sand. If people don't want to look at the evidence fairly and honestly, that's their call, but I refuse to do that. I want to try to look at the truth and I want to hear people out to see if there's possibilities in the things that they're saying.
It's one of the things that I love about you and that drew me to your channel was that the integrity that you have in covering your cases. It just made me want to be that type of person as well. I mean, to make sure that what you're doing is with the utmost integrity and factual and fact-based. And just like you said, the not burying your head in the sand and actually following the evidence wherever it leads, no matter how painful that might be. And in your own case, when you're talking about your aunt, that was, of course, very painful for you to have to follow that evidence trail. But you did it so remarkably well. I don't think people are aware of what it's like to be boots on the ground as an investigator compared to what we do here, where we're delving into everything that we can get that's been printed or has been interviews and things like that. You're actually going out and meeting the people in the cases. You're meeting the victims' families and friends and associates and law enforcement. And how's that dynamic different, do you think? What does it give you?
That's what's really interesting is because I have so much respect for media organizations and a lot of these podcasts that are telling these true crime stories because it gets those stories out into the world. And I think they're so important because we need to hear those cautionary tales, or it could also help out when the podcast is about maybe an unsolved crime. It can also help get, one more person to hear it, or maybe it gets to the right person that is going to have a chance to solve this or knows something about the case. So, but there is a limit to those types of shows because you can only really report off what you can find online. A lot of them don't talk to people who were actually involved. So the problem with that is if a news source has reported incorrect information or only a piece of the information, that often is shared across multiple platforms and then sometimes becomes it's like a game of telephone. I told you one thing and then pretty soon now it's this weird conspiracy theory. And so I think what's different about what I do is when I show up, I actually go ask the person who originally said it or who was originally there. And it's really fascinating when you hear the whole story, or sometimes all of a sudden something that you thought was so weird now has context. And when you put it in context, it's no longer weird. It's now like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess any of us would have done that. It just seemed weird because I didn't know why it had happened. And so I think that's what's different about my show is I don't usually have an opinion on what exactly happened when I go into it. Often I don't really know much about the case. And I think people yell at me sometimes when I start because they're like, didn't you do your research? But it's a series. It's an ongoing series where I'm showcasing what I'm finding. So you start at the beginning of that journey with me, so if you start at the beginning, I don't know a lot yet. That's why I have to go through every little thing and look at everything. And I think really being able to weigh out what I'm finding and showcasing it and getting feedback from the audience. And I love that feedback because it challenges what we're putting out there, or it gives me ideas about things we need to look into. And so it almost, for the first time, true crime becomes almost something you can participate in. You can help and get involved in the cases. You can comment on the videos. You can maybe say, hey, did you think about maybe that person being a suspect? And I think the way true crime has been done, it just really hasn't been done this way before. And I think that's what's pretty cool, is that people can make it's much more interactive if you want it to be.
It just amazed me. And then to find out that you were covering Robert's case, who is, Robert's so near and dear to Shelby and mine's heart because he's local to us. And I was just floored by that. And then to find out that you were making all these trips back and forth for so long, I was just like, she's just an amazing woman to be able to do that. Let's get in and start talking about Robert. What was it that got you to know about his case? Did somebody send it to you? How did you hear about Robert?
Well, what's crazy is, I had made some films in the documentary world, but I had never tried to do a true crime series. So as far as anybody knowing who I was in the true crime realm, you really wouldn't have, because I always am behind the scenes. But when I decided to do this show, I just posted on Instagram, does anybody know of any true crime instances that that haven't been solved, that they wish they had more answers to? And all of a sudden 3 people reached out. I probably got maybe 25 messages, but 3 people from one town, Pekin, and they all wanted me to do the Robert B case, and they all didn't seem connected to one another. So it wasn't like they had written me together. So I just thought that was really fascinating, that there was this little town that 3 people had just randomly seen that Instagram post and commented on it. And so then I pulled up his picture online, and he's got this adorable picture, and he's missing a front tooth. It's just a really cute picture of him. And after I saw that, I just knew I wanted to tell his story, and I didn't even know what I was doing at that point. So I don't know really what I was thinking. So I just packed up the car with my camera gear and drove into town, basically.
What was your first impression of Pekin when you drove in? Because you're from the East, right? You're from the East Coast. You're not used to seeing rural America, are you?
It was definitely a culture shock. It was so different than any place I had ever been. And, a lot of the stuff's kind of dated or hasn't been kept up with. So the downtown, isn't full of stores. Some of the buildings are boarded up. And then there's this beautiful park in the middle of Pekin, like this insanely beautiful park with ponds and stuff. So it's kind of this weird, like, juxtaposed.
Paddle boats and geese and ducks. You could go feed the ducks.
Yes, for my first trip in, I was like on some of the outskirts of Pekin, which were kind of, neighborhoods that I hadn't spent a lot of time in. Definitely there was a lot of poverty. You could tell there was a lot of drug use. And I drove out of that into this beautiful park. And I was like, what? This is so crazy that this is in the middle of this town. And, but the people in the town embraced me in a very beautiful way. And I thought that was incredible that they did that with a stranger. So even though I did have some apprehension when driving into the town, I was really impressed with the character of the people who live there.
So when you got there, how did you go about, what was the first thing you thought you needed to do on Robert's case when you got there? How did you decide who to talk to first and who to go to first?
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of a roll of the dice. So I posted on there was a couple Facebooks up, groups that were actually dueling almost. They were almost against what the other ones thought about the Robert B case. But I asked if anybody would talk to me, and somebody did offer to talk to me. Now, this person never went on camera, but they gave me an entire notebook of research they had done, and they took us around to some of the different spots that were important to this case, and they kind of spent a whole afternoon with us, just kind of going around with us. So that was kind of the first person I reached out to, and that led to everything else, really. And then the next thing I decided to do is reach out to the local news, which at that time was the Pekin Times. Now it's part of the Journal Star in Peoria, but the reporters who worked on the Robert B. case agreed to meet with me, and then from there it kind of spiraled. From there, I got names and information, what Facebook groups to look on, what names, who knew stuff about this case, and so I just started calling people or Facebook messaging them to get them to see if they'd be on the show, and almost everybody said yes.
Was Lisa receptive to talking to you when you first contacted her?
Yeah, actually, that's what's kind of wild is Lisa not only was receptive to talk to me, but then she also came on a second time when I had some really serious and tough questions for her. And I was really surprised that she, every single time, was willing to meet with me and look me in the eye, and have conversations with me about the case, and about my work on it. And I think a lot of people are really hard on her, and I can understand that, but I do also think there's a lot to be said for somebody who's willing to sit down and talk to someone who's investigating their son's murder, especially when they've been blamed for it, and still sit down and talk with me.
Right. And I get that too, because she may never have won the Mother of the Year award. We probably could all agree on that. But I definitely believe she loved her son in her odd, strange way, based on that environment that she lived in. Because
I definitely got that impression. I mean, I do think that, I do feel like those tears are real, that she was in a lot of pain. And I do think that, that was her partner in crime, was Bonsai. Now, I don't agree with anything, as far as the parenting style. And I definitely think, I don't believe that Lisa had anything to do with Robert B.'s death, but she also kind of fed him to the lions inadvertently,
yes.
I believe. So it's
Yes.
really hard sometimes to know, where someone's fault begins and ends on those types of things. But it's a hard case that way.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you were able to come out and say that, because I've had a lot of people ask me about her and where I thought she falls into that category. And I really don't think that she had anything to do with his death either. But I do think that there was neglect. There was a lot of things that, in hindsight, she needed desperate parenting class advice on how to parent him. And Robert was autistic and had a lot of things that he was dealing with as well, and that's not easy for any parent to have to deal with. And Shelby and I can attest to that, because one of my grandchildren is autistic. So it's a challenge. It takes a lot of people to help out in that situation. But you and I talked before. I think a lot of what happened to Robert wasn't just one person. I think it was a whole lot of people failed him in many respects. So
I agree with that, because shoot, am I on mute? Am I on mute?
No, you're
Okay.
not on mute.
Sorry,
We can
I
hear
couldn't
you.
tell. I'm having internet issues at my house. So no, I think that his mom didn't have the tools to be an effective parent the way that Robert needed to be. And we talked about it last week. So many people, dropped the ball on giving her help and the help that she did need. She didn't have extended resources like some parents do. And especially when you have a child with special needs. I mean, we have a 2-parent household, and it still took an entire, neighborhood to help us at times. So she just didn't have that.
Yeah, I think it's hard when you look at that. And then, I mean, the amount of times that child services were called, it's heartbreaking that system failed him, especially when, I mean, basically the house was condemned for days until she got it cleaned, and they took the dogs, but they didn't take Robert B. And, I don't know, it's hard, I grew up in a very comfortable life, so it's hard for me to, try to think about what that would be like. But it's frustrating for me that the things that we put into the place to make sure that what happened to Robert B. doesn't absolutely failed him time and time and time again. And if any one of those times had been caught, I believe he would have had a chance to have a life. And it's so sad that it just got completely missed again and again.
And it did. And the DCFS in Illinois is it's low funded, and they don't have enough staff, and their caseloads are just humongous. So kids frequently slip through the cracks. And when you're poor like that and you have them come in and they're like, well, you need to clean this up, and where does she start? I just don't feel like they gave her any social resources or outlets either to assist her.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know what kind of stuff she was getting or how she was doing that, but it definitely seemed like a not a healthy situation. And even the filth within the home didn't, the way people describe it, there was pictures taken. It just doesn't seem like a clean, healthy environment for anyone to live in.
No, I mean, I saw the pictures that you had and some of the pictures that I found when I was researching his case, and it's like there were reports out there of how he was bullied at school and teased at school for his smell and for his clothing. And it's like, when you live in a house where every room is just piles and piles of clothes and garbage, and where was he to find clean clothes? Where was he to get his next bath or shower when you don't have running water for so long, or whatever's been turned off? And he was, sometimes he got to go to friend's house and maybe possibly get a good home cooked meal and a shower and a bed. I mean, I don't even know the child had a bed every night. I mean, those are the things that are real in his case that is just, to me, so gut wrenching. And you saw it firsthand. I mean, you were in that environment with those people that he hung around with. He ran the streets basically unattended at the age of 13, and probably long before that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there were some really situations, I want to say, that we walked into that it just kind of showed how the community isn't flourishing financially. And I think that was really hard to be around. I mean, one house, there was so much dog urine on everything that we all smelled like ammonia when we left. And it's things like that you almost don't realize that there are people who live that way, and to see the humanity in them and to still have them tell their story, is so important, because those situations, I don't think, make somebody not equipped to talk about what they've seen or heard. And it was a hard case that way, though, because there were so many people who were kind of skirting on that life of drugs, or just not being able to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And so, it was very eye-opening to see that.
Did you think, when you did see the dynamic with the drugs and everything that happened with the meth and all the different drugs that was going on, do you think that was the ultimate cause of everything that happened to him, or was he a byproduct of that world?
Ooh, it's so hard, because you're dealing with a 13-year-old boy who is autistic, who wants, wants to be looked at as an older kid. His mom is having an affair with a 17-year-old, and that's only 4 years older than Robert B. So it's hard, because, you can tell he wants to be, I think, an adult and treated as an adult, and those older kids seem very cool to him, and his mom is doing some drugs with him. What she admitted to me was at the very least huffing, and she had done that with him. We see her at a backyard party at one point, and he's holding a cigarette or pot, I don't know what it is, but you can see it in his hand. And I think, you start to see some of that stuff, and drugs were probably just a part of his life in some way, and I think they were either around him, he was potentially doing them. And so I think when you put all of that, when you mix all of those things together, I mean, you really have the perfect storm of what, I think the show reveals happened to Robert B. And it's really kind of heartbreaking, but it's kind of obvious if you actually go there and talk to the people and see what's going on, what happened to him.
And so with you saying how, excuse me, how obvious it is going there and seeing what happened to him, with you saying that, I'm just going to throw this right back at you. Why didn't law enforcement see what happened to him? What do you think is the blinder with them, and why they wouldn't listen to everything you took them? Because didn't you take them like a lot of information, a lot of evidence, a lot of stuff that they should have looked at?
Yeah, this is really hard. With my aunt's case, two people went out on a boat together and only one came back alive. And that one is a little, I can understand why maybe the cops that one's really hard, because it's almost like a he said, she said. It's not a perfect case. And the she said on that side is dead,
Right.
So that it's really hard. But with Robert B. case, I really can't believe it. I question every day, what level of evidence would one need? I mean, I don't know. And we did. I mean, we could only post, I probably gave them, of the really significant evidence. I mean, they must have had double what we put on the show as far as the stuff that I thought directly led to the people who hurt Robert B. And I don't know. I mean, I'm confounded, and I've wondered this often, and I wonder if because some of the witnesses would be drug addicted individuals, is that make it impossible for them to put them on the stand? Is it because people's stories shifted because there was shifting of stories? Does that make them bad witnesses? Maybe I could see that. So are they looking at it from that point of view? But the one thing I think that really concerns me is we had a source from within the Pekin Police Department that told me the other day that they have the killer in jail already. And is what that person was alluding to was Keith Brackett, which was a friend of Lisa's at the time of Robert B.'s disappearance. And so, if that's true, that makes me really sad, because I really just don't believe Keith Brackett had anything to do with it.
And Keith Brackett is where Bonsai's remains were found, correct, on his property?
On the back of his relative's property, but he mowed the property. Obviously, he was familiar with the property, so that would not have been an unlikely spot for the body to be if Keith had killed Bonsai.
But wouldn't they have found the body sooner? I mean, if he had been in that backyard for any length of time, they didn't find him for 18 months?
Yeah, and what's crazy is I talked to a lot of people who I would take out a map and say, okay, you walked right along the back fence of that property. Like, I would make them talk it through with me, and they would, and like even people would show me pictures and they'd be like, look here, we were at the back of that fence. And there
was nothing there.
That's what I would say. I would have probably had about 5 to 6 people confirm. And I felt pretty good about it after we went over where they said they were. I felt really confident that they had been right where his body was found and didn't find it. And now it's kind of dense back there. There's a lot of bugs. It's not pleasant to be walking through. So I don't know. Could someone have walked around it or somehow? I don't know, but it seems like they all were very clear that it was the back of that fence. So I have a hard time believing his body was there the whole time.
That's my take on it. I think it was dumped there later on to frame him, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's a pretty easy frame job. I mean, we're not talking, this isn't, you don't have to be a rocket science to be like, oh, hey, look, everyone thinks this guy did it. Let's go dump the body on his property. Or his relative's property. So to me, it was just a stroke of luck that they knew him well enough to know that. Not really a complicated conspiracy going on there, though.
What was the story that you heard as to where his body was being kept, though, before it was dispersed?
Yeah, that's what's interesting is that cooler. I mean, there are probably 3 witnesses we spoke to that knew about that cooler, knew parts about where that cooler had been. Now, these people don't know each other and it wasn't like they were colluding on stories. And I didn't tell them that I'd spoken to the other individuals, and they all had parts of the cooler story. And then we even had someone go and wired up talking about the cooler stuff. And we got some really good evidence there that the cops completely ignored. So the cooler, I believe he was kept in a cooler. I believe at some point they said it was stolen meat or fish because it started to stink so bad. It had been being kept in an outside garage. And I think it's really fascinating that, there's so many people who know that cooler story. So I believe he was kept in that cooler for a period of time.
And what I think is amazing about what you just said is that when you're out there and you're doing this and you're talking to people and you're getting these stories and you're getting this evidence that they're presenting to you, I think it's good for everybody in chat to pay attention and listen to what she's saying about how she did not talk to these people about who she'd spoken to and heard the story. So the story was coming to her from different people that did not know each other and that did not have contact with each other through her or themselves. So this is the way law enforcement is supposed to put together evidence in a crime. So that's why they talk about, well, we don't want to talk about the crime scene, because the only person that's going to know about that are the people who are involved. They're going to be able to tell you. So if you've got 3 people telling you that a body was placed in a cooler in a garage and they don't have any relationship to one another, that to me is like 50 huge red flags, not one, but like 50. I just don't understand how law enforcement can just say that doesn't have any bearing on this case. I mean, it's weird.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'll do you one better. I gave them plenty of names of people I'd spoken to and how I was able to tie this entire string of events together, and they never even reached out to any of them, as far as I know. Now, obviously, they could have told my sources to keep their mouths shut, but I just don't believe my sources would have. I mean, they were willing to risk a lot to talk to me in the first place. And they had allowed me to give their names to the law enforcement if law enforcement thought their information was valuable, and they never got reached out to. So, so I felt like all the work we did was kind of just, I guess, for the world to maybe know what happened, because it definitely didn't, I don't think impacted the case much. I don't know.
Ash, did you ever find out like what kind of condition his remains were in?
Yeah, they were basically just down to the bone. They weren't even able to recover all the bones, but there was a significant amount there. Apparently, there had been seen animal activity, meaning, raccoons or something chewing on the bones. There was only a little tiny bit of flesh, is my understanding, or viscera, I don't even know exactly what you'd call it, but inside of the skull cap, and they were able to get some tissue samples from there to test for toxicology, stuff like that. So, but I don't, all of that had been out there a while, so no one really kind of knows what's exactly 100% true on that. So it's interesting though that the body had to have been out there for a while, because it was basically just down to bones, and some of those bones were missing.
Right.
Are you pretty confident with your case after going? I mean, how many months did you spend on, I know you're still on his case. You're not done with it, but how many months did you spend?
It was probably a year of active investigating. So, and that was in that year, I went to Pekin once a month for anywhere from 3 days to 7 days, let's say, to talk to new witnesses, anonymous witnesses, ones that would be on camera, to kind of go into some of the places that some of these things were alleged to have happened, and kind of take a look for myself to see what I thought. So it was pretty intense investigating. It was a huge chunk of my time, and there were so many tips coming in. At some points it was a little bit overwhelming, because I would get a tip in at like 9 o'clock at night, and I didn't want to take it at that moment, but I was afraid if I didn't, that I might not get the tip. So it was a lot for a long time there. I'm kind of happy that wave's over. And even though, there's only so far I can go with a case before I just start to repeat myself over and over again, unless new information comes out. So even though we are still taking in tips, we still have talked to other people, but I would say nothing new has come in. The last thing I heard was 5 or 6 months ago, the FBI did get involved. I was called by one of my sources because they had been questioned by the FBI, and that's the last I ever heard. So I have no idea if the FBI was just talking to that one person, if they continued to look into it, if they've looked into it and closed it. I have no idea, but that's the last thing that I heard.
Do you know if Robert's body was ever released to the family?
No, Lisa's never got his body. They still have it. And that's a tough one, because you can tell she desperately wants to actually bury her son, and who knows if she'll ever get that opportunity. And I'm also not making a judgment call if she deserves that, but I do believe that the pain of a mother losing a child must be the worst pain in existence. So I can't imagine that that would be difficult, not to have your son's body.
I can attest to that. It is the most horrendous thing, and I can't imagine not have been able to have buried my son. My heart goes out to her, to his aunt and his sister, because that the family desperately wants to have that ability to at least give him a place of rest, and he's not sitting in a morgue somewhere as evidence in a case. To me, that's just wrong. I don't understand why they would need that, to do that to her either. I just don't really understand why they wouldn't release the body. Have you ever heard of that in a case before, where they just keep the body for years and never release it? I've never heard of that.
I think it's strange too, because what other evidence can you get from the bones that you couldn't take photos and video of? And plus Lisa, I don't think the cops think she had anything to do with it. I think they probably feel like I do, that she had lived in very unfortunate circumstances that I believe led to his death. But I don't think that they think, or I think, or most people who really looked into this think that Lisa had anything to do with it. So I think that's, something that's hard to think about, is that if she didn't have anything to do with it, and the bones can't provide any additional information, why would you not at the very least get them back to her? Or
exactly.
keep whatever samples you need, but maybe get whatever you can back. I don't know.
Well, and I think what people have to realize is that just because, we may not have agreed with her parenting and things like that, this is still her son. And, she lost him tragically. And while his upbringing might have led to his demise, sadly, you are a product of your environment. And I think she was the best parent she knew how to be honest. I don't think she knew any better. And, if people are holding that against her, then that's wrong too. It's still her son, regardless of what we think of her as a parent.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I feel. I think that always in any of these cases, even though sometimes it's really hard because they're angering, but I think that you have to remember that. And just because it's not your lifestyle or how you grew up or what you would have picked doesn't always mean it was a cruel intention. It might just mean someone didn't know better. And so I think there has to be a little bit of leeway, because I just don't believe she killed him. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think
we have to be very careful when we start judging people for lifestyle, or for how they grew up, or what they find themselves in, because it goes back to the same kind of coverage that happens with African American females who are in the sex trade. They basically get no coverage because people just don't think they're worthy of the coverage because of the lifestyle that they lead. Or I just think it's wrong. And it's the same in this instance to me, because I'm not defending Lisa as far as a parent. I'm defending her as a mother. And she gave birth to that child, and there is a bond there. And you can see that when you interviewed her. I felt extremely compelled that she loved that little boy to the best of her ability. And that's just how I feel about her. But I think the whole thing with him is so frustrating because it's not solved, in my opinion. And even though the police are saying they think it is, that the person who did it's in custody, you led a rally to try to get them to get the IASP involved in this case. And now you've been told that possibly the FBI, which to me is even better than the Illinois State Police, if the FBI is looking at it. Is there anything that we can do to keep the FBI's eyes on it, in your opinion? What do you think we can do?
Oh, God, that is so tough. I mean, we did a lot. We did a letter writing campaign. We held the protest. I constantly was reaching out to the state's sheriff, the FBI. Like, I was trying to get, a lot of times I would get no response whatsoever. The state's attorney. And it's hard to know what to do. I mean, one time a woman who worked in the state's attorney's office called me, and I was so excited because I thought I'd finally got someone with the Robert B. case, but instead she called to scold me because we went into the building that I believe that Robert might have met the end of his life in. And she called to scold me for going in there without permission. And I was just devastated that
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I was literally like, this is why you guys can't solve child murders, because you're worried about me and not the person who killed Robert B. And I really feel that way, When
you were on the boots on the ground there and you were doing this investigation, did you ever feel like you were in danger?
There were a couple times where it had gotten a little bit intense, especially the night we were hanging the flyers. We had a group going around and ripping them down. I think, but I don't know if I ever felt fear. There was one day when we were doing these pretty highly publicized library events that we actually had put a camera on the car, and we did have someone walking around the car multiple times. So we just started putting security systems in place so that we could at least monitor if people are overly interested in where we're staying or overly interested in our vehicles. So we've just kind of followed that from there on. But I want to say those were probably the times I felt kind of the most uncomfortable. But I've never felt like, I was being followed or something too scary was happening. I felt like I could kind of see all the stuff that was coming.
Well, that's good, because I was always wondering, like, there were a couple of characters that you interviewed that I think I might have been a little bit nervous of being with there, Ash, just so you know.
It's interesting too, because obviously we deal with anonymous sources, but there's been a few murderers now that I've met with, and it is kind of makes you think for a moment, because who am I if they were able to do that to somebody else? But right. Yeah, it does make me nervous.
But I think that's what's different.
Sorry, Shelby, go ahead.
Okay, I think that's what's so unique about you, Ash, though. When you're doing these cases, you have a way of connecting with people and making them feel comfortable with you. You're totally not judgmental, no matter what it is that they're talking about. And I think that that's remarkable. And I think that that's why you are able to get people to talk to you that maybe wouldn't talk to law enforcement or feel comfortable talking to law enforcement.
Yeah, thank you. That was really the ultimate compliment. I am just kind of an unbiased person in general. I often can see both sides of an issue. Even if I feel strongly on one of the sides, I often can see why the other side feels the way they do, and feel some understanding or sympathy towards that, depending on what it is. But I'm always the one who's like, oh, okay, I get that, or my mind can be changed. That's another thing. I don't feel like I'm always like, oh, I'm right, I know this for a fact. I often have my mind changed by people showing me credible evidence, explaining something to me in detail, showing me how something could have happened. Like, that can change my mind. And so I think that's maybe one reason I was made to do this, is that I can look at both sides, and I will try to do that as fairly as humanly possible. And I don't close myself down when other possibilities exist. Doesn't mean I always accept them, but I don't mind running down the road and seeing if it's possible, because you just never know.
I think that's one of the things that also impressed me about you when I look at your cases, because even with KJ's case, when you're down in Valdosta, Georgia, which is highly known for its racism, deep seated in that town for generations upon generations, and you're sitting down with the sheriff, and you basically, you just sat there and had the conversation with him and asked him the hard questions, and you just weren't afraid to do that. And I think a lot of people would be like stepping on eggshells or worried about, tipping the apple cart, so to speak. And you didn't have that, but you come across, when you do it, it's just it's not like you're being harsh. It's like you do it with just a really ease. There's just an ease about you. It's just amazing to watch you when you interview people.
I'd say it's more like you care, even if you think you're talking to like the perpetrator, you still care about the person, and that comes through when you're doing the interview. That's what I
Oh,
get from it.
thank you. Yeah, and that's really how I feel, because even perpetrators, sometimes what they did can make sense in your mind. Not that you'd ever do it, but all of us have been on the brink of doing something stupid in our lives, or we did do something stupid and didn't get caught. And so I do feel that connection to people, that this didn't mean to be bad, or it doesn't make you all bad because there's this one bad thing about you. And I think that allows me to kind of move through some of the different people. A lot of our cases, we're talking to people on both sides of it, and I think it allows me to move flawlessly from one side to the other, because I think people do learn quickly that I'm honoring how they're saying things. I'm not taking them out of context, and I'm showing what they said fairly. I don't just take a piece of their interview. I showcase how people say it and what they said and what they meant, and I make sure I'm really clear about that. So because I could edit things, so I could take things and put them wherever and make people say whatever. And that's one commitment I've made sure I will never do. I will make it in context and what the person said. And I think that a lot of our media sources are missing that. They give you this like little 2-minute snippet that doesn't give you all the details, and it makes you think something even though they didn't tell you to think that, but it kind of leads you down that road instead of being fair to both sides. And so that's one thing I find to be really important over all else, is that I give everybody a chance to tell their side of the story. And I do that in an unbiased way, so that they can really showcase what their beliefs are and why they believe that.
And I think that's, like I said, that I just think that's amazing about you, because it's definitely something we need in true crime. It's something that we don't, that's refreshing to me about you with true crime. And it's why I highlight your channel on mine. I just think more people need to know about what you do and how you do it, because those qualities about you, we need to emulate, and have more of that. And I wish I could see that more in our community, because our community has a lot of things that need to be fixed about it, in my opinion. I did put up on the screen, if you can see, Michelle is one of my moderators, and she's a CSI. And she says that unfortunately they have to keep the body sometimes. So when they do get more evidence or weapon missing, if they find it, they can match it to damage and they won't have to exhume the body. Sad but true. So that gives us a little insight as to why, but it's very sad. She said, especially knife wounds, they leave marks in the bones so they can match the type of point, edge, depth to the weapon. So that gives us a little understanding there. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
it does
Thanks
make
for that,
me.
Michelle. Yeah, that was really interesting. I learned new stuff every day. That's really interesting.
It's really nice having her around because she's a wealth of information when it comes to crime scene investigation. But yes, I like everything that you do because it's all fact based. You're out there looking for and searching for answers and for the truth of what happened in these cases. And no matter what the evidence leads you to, that's what you're going to report.
Yeah, that is. I mean, there have been some really hard times for me for so many reasons. I mean, and even the Kendrick Johnson case, I'm getting a lot of blowback right now. But I started off because I had watched what all the media was saying and what I had seen online and through the podcast. And I thought that Kendrick was murdered by potentially two of his classmates who were white and he was black. And, with what's going on in our society right now, also, that didn't sound that unbelievable. I mean, that it seems like that keeps coming up in the news. So it kind of, that case grabbed me and I was really curious about what happened. And then, I uncover the evidence and I feel like I have to follow it and be logical about it and showcase my work no matter what happens. And that was a really hard case because you go in thinking one thing and that's just not what I found. And I had to start, halfway through our season here, start being like, okay, look, I don't believe it's true what people think happened to Kendrick Johnson. I don't believe that the Bell brothers killed him. And I think the evidence is very clear. And I think their alibis make perfect sense. And it's like, it's tough. You walk into it thinking one thing, but I'm not going to, if I find out that that's not the truth, I'm definitely going to say it. I'm going to say it loudly because it's not fair to not look at the evidence honestly.
You even call out the major podcaster that did the big podcast on finding Kendrick, which I thought was, that takes a lot. I mean, to stand up on our social media platform that we have and call someone out like that and say, look, you sensationalized this story. You weren't after the truth. You sensationalized it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really sad because what Jason Pollock did there is, what we as a society have done to minorities for years, right? They look what we think a criminal looks like, and so now that's who did the crime. And in this case, the Bell brothers look like, I'm sure, what you'd see in a lynch mob. They bring you back to that moment when you back them up, when you juxtapose them with what's happening here. And that breaks my heart because now we're like, oh, okay, so these guys are racists, bigots who want to kill black people. And I think we're basing that off how they look. And I think it's crazy that the script has flipped on this case. I'm not saying that that's done everywhere. And I'm not saying, oh, poor white person is being treated in a racist way. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's really interesting to me that we have flipped the script on this one case. And it's terrifying to see. I mean, I saw a picture of Brian Bell the other day and it said that he should die in an electric chair or something like that. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, this guy has been dealing with this for 9 years. They apparently tried to call an event that they're hosting. The group tried to call and make the venue that was hosting this event not host their event. And like stuff like that breaks my heart that these guys are never going to get to live a normal life when there is clear and present evidence that shows that they couldn't have had anything to do with the death of Kendrick Johnson. And people just don't want to look at the surveillance tape.
He wasn't even near him, was he? Wasn't he on the other side of the school when this happened?
Yeah, one's in class on the other side of the school, verified with surveillance tape, and the other's at a wrestling tournament that's verified by like 8 different points that are very valid.
How can you even then point to them? I mean, that doesn't make sense, but it happens, and you know that because that was the narrative going in. And I see that in all the cases that I cover happening as well. Delphi to be an example, and all my people that are here are huge on they follow the Delphi case, but we're dealing with that every day with these POIs that people put out there and they say, oh, this is the person who's responsible, but they weren't even in the area of the crime. There is absolutely no evidence to back up that these people that they're talking about were there. And so
well, I also think that that's as a society, we've moved away from innocent until proven guilty, sadly. And so the media judges, people judge, and you have your mind made up without ever having a trial or having all the evidence in front of you. And so these people and persons of interest get vilified for no good reason other than, you have it in your head that you think they're guilty.
Yeah.
And I agree with that.
Yeah, it's an intense, the media has put this intense pressure on people to believe like one thing or the other. And I think it's amazing that, as anything develops, the scariest thing to me is people who absolutely know the answer 100%. I would much rather have somebody who's open to information and looking at things than just being on one side of it and then blindly following that side no matter what is being said. And that's what I think is so sad. And I often think to myself, like, what would you have done if it was your child? Not black, not white, but what would you have done on either side? If KJ was your child or Brian Bell was your child, how would you react to those situations and try to look at it from being a mom and dad? And right. I think then you can be more fair. But if you can't think about it that way, I don't think you can be fair in this case.
Are you feeling like KJ's family's having a tough time accepting what you're finding?
I did email them just to let them know that I wasn't finding evidence against the Bell family, just to tell them, because I always want to be transparent with the cases I'm working on. Obviously, I had asked the Johnsons' permission before I even started. And I never heard back. And so, I respect that. I'm sure they think I can't even imagine what they must think. I went in to try to put this case together for them, and I'm finding out probably something that they don't want, out there
exactly.
or right. believe or whatever. And so I'm sure they think I was like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't know, but I did go down there genuinely trying to help. It's just, I only ever promised I would try to uncover the truth. And if the truth isn't what they believe, well, I didn't mean for that to happen. It just happened that way.
Yeah. And, I was always, my mom always taught me to judge gently. She always told me to judge gently. It's real easy to try to be the judge, juror, and convictor of people and what's going on. But when we start covering these kind of cases that are still open and unsolved, we need to be very careful, I think, in what and how we present things and what we say, because I am always telling the people who listen to me, that is the utmost importance, because we can taint juries, we can taint cases. We have to be very mindful and careful about it. And you still get blowback on that, where people say that's absolutely not true. Nothing you're going to say is going to matter in the big scheme of things with this case. And that's not true. And I think you're finding that out just by what you've been able to uncover in KJ's case. Here you're finding a whole different narrative where the evidence is leading you and nobody's truly talking about.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I mean, it literally blows my mind that in the film Finding Kendrick Johnson, the director puts up a graphic that absolutely shows that Brian Bell is nowhere near KJ when KJ is last seen on camera. And the director never comments on that. Instead, he comments on this stupid piece of surveillance footage that's taken at 10 a.m. that shows Brian and KJ walking like 6 feet apart in a hall together, and somehow claims that this is how that they're linked, that we know Brian Bell's lying because there's this clip of the two of them at 10 a.m. in a hall together, not even looking at each other. And I'm so disappointed in the journalism. Like, how in God's name do you make an entire film that the Johnsons own 50% of? And I think that's what people are missing here, is they own 50% of that movie. So how could Jason have been not biased making it? I mean,
exactly. He had a stake in it.
Yes.
So of course he's biased.
Yeah.
And he's not telling it from a transparent type of narrative. He went into it with preconceived ideas already. So somebody in the chat, Julie Myers, says she doesn't think that KB had anything to do with Robert's death. I don't know if she's late coming in, but yeah, Ash already spoke to that. No, she doesn't believe Keith Bracken had anything to do with it either.
Yeah, I really don't believe Keith Brackett had anything to do with Robert B.'s death. I think Keith Brackett is an unfortunate circumstance of his environment. But the one things that really kind of said to me is he didn't seem like a sexual predator, at least around the teenagers that were living in the tent city behind his aunt's house there. I talked to a lot of the teenagers who are now young adults, and they didn't seem to ever talk about him being handsy or inappropriate with them. They did say he was like flirtatious, but it was always anything that ever went on was always there was no one being pressured or hurt in any way in that way. So I thought that was one really interesting piece, that he didn't seem like a pedophile to me. And then, I think when you look at him being transgender, and he's very, very public about it, he's walking around in Hello Kitty pajamas, he's got his nails painted, in a town like Beacon. I just don't know if they're ready for that. Obviously,
exactly. That's what I was just going to say. Yeah. Anybody that knows Pekin, it's a very small town USA. You don't walk around like that if you're of the male persuasion. You're and I think so that makes it easy for some people to look at him and say, "Oh, well, he's extremely different, and therefore he's an easy victim to, and I do think he's a victim also in this case, because I don't think he's violent.
Pekin is known for its conservatism.
Very
I want to say, it's very. There's been books written about Pekin. It was known as a sundown town. You and I talked about that.
Yep.
Very racist. I knew it when I was growing up. The town had signs on the edge of town by the river that said if you were the N-word person and were found after sundown, you'd be thrown in the river or worse. I remember asking my father about that when I was growing up, what that meant. The town has evolved somewhat, but it has not evolved past that. There's still that underlying racism that's there, and Shelby can talk about that because she has friends who are African American who will not go to that city. Very rarely will they want to go there, and definitely not after dark.
Yeah, no, or with alone. Like they would never go alone. They'd have to go with me or another white friend to feel safe, which is sad.
It's so crazy. I mean, like I must have just grown up very sheltered. Like I it's so hard for me sometimes to get my head around that this is still going on. Like that is so heartbreaking to me that people still to this day, because of the color of their skin, have to worry or have fear, even if there isn't a substantial worry anymore, but have that fear because it must be just generational, that you'd be afraid to go into a town. Like that just breaks my heart that there are areas that are still very much like that. It makes it very real.
Pekin, Illinois, Vanessa. It's Pekin, Illinois. Yeah, it's when you and I were speaking earlier this weekend, that was one of the things that kind of stuck out at me, that there are people in this country that live, and I'm not saying you lived a sheltered life by any sense, but I'm just saying you grew up in a completely different culture and a completely different part of this country that doesn't see that. You never saw that. And so for you really didn't know it existed. So there are people who truly believe in this country that this doesn't exist. And when they talk about that, they're not lying. They're not being, how do I want to put it? They're not showing
being ignorant.
Their ignorance. They're just they really, truly have never seen it or, been exposed to it. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is so true. I mean, being white and coming from an upper middle class family, I didn't see racism in the areas I lived. Obviously, because it probably wasn't there in
Courtney,
this
thank you so very much. How kind of you.
of what you.
So thankful for your support of my channel.
Money.
But yeah, it's one of those things that is hard to talk about. People don't want to talk about. And it's because it's emotional. It brings up a lot of visceral type emotions. When we talk about it, people get very angry and very defensive. But I think that in the case and what you went through in the city with, I think that was part of it. I just think you dealt with that while you were there, trying to get law enforcement to pay attention to what was happening. I hate to say it, but I believe if Bonsai had been a white middle to upper class youth, things would have been a lot different with his case.
Yeah, I think that, and then having so many drug addicted individuals surrounding the case. I think, maybe the cops kind of washed their hands of it. I have no idea. It just makes me sad because Robert B is a 13-year-old boy, and that's what gets me. He's not an adult. He wasn't making his own choices, and so it's really hard to think that it just doesn't seem like he mattered all that much, to them, as far as I see it,
No, exactly. I think it goes back to that. There's sadly in our society, there are people that people consider throwaways, or that just don't, it doesn't really matter to them because it's never going to happen to them. For one, they're not going to be anywhere around this, they're not going to be subjected to drugs, or they don't raise their children this way, or whatever. And the ones that fall through the cracks, or the ones that find themselves in this position most often are our children, because they're the ones who suffer from the drug abuse and the alcoholism and the neglect and all the things that go with that. And we can blame DCFS and we can blame, whoever, but it's not really about blame. It's about, let's fix it. What can we do to change this so that we don't have a Robert B in every school, so that we don't have a Robert B in every classroom? Because I think somebody in my chat the other night when we were talking about him said that there's probably a child like him in every classroom in America to some degree, very poor, probably hungry, doesn't know if they're going to get a bed to sleep in tonight. Sadly, it's true. And we need to work better at trying to fix that. But the work that you've done for him and his case, it's truly remarkable, as Shelby said, and I can't thank you enough. And I'm sure that Pekin feels the same way. The majority of Pekin that came out for you anyway. There's always the ones that'll pull down the flyers, and you don't know if they're the ones that don't want the case solved or if they're just trying to be those people.
Right. Well, it was actually funny too, because they said, because we figured out who they were, and they said that they did it because we hung the flyers on the war memorial, which now we had a bunch of volunteers. So I don't know. I don't know if somebody did or didn't, but I just obviously we would never have done that. Like, obviously no one in my group condoned hanging anything on a war memorial, but I just thought to myself, do you really think those vets that fought for this country would mind if a flyer asking to get help for this little boy happened to get placed on the memorial? Not the place that it should be placed, but do you think those vets would have really minded, or do you think they would have wanted to honor that this boy needed someone to care about his case? And that, it just made me so sad that that thinking is so screwed up that you couldn't even see. And then you had to rip down all the signs. If that was actually the reason you were ripping down signs, wouldn't you have just ripped the ones down off the memorial, which would have been understandable? So
I know you want to stand up and say, who out there among you doesn't want to see justice for a 13-year-old autistic boy who was murdered? Please raise your hand. I mean, seriously, what does that say about those people?
Yeah, it was crazy too, and I had a conversation with their son at one point because we had posted their names on Facebook because I was like, you know what, you want to pull them down, go ahead, and the son was actively trying to make sure that anyone who was posting their address, I was pulling that down. But I was like, my God, I said to him, like, they have, like, I can't believe these guys have kids, like. They get what that pain would be, and they still did it. I just like, it's remarkable.
Interesting. There's a question here from Libra Scales M2. I have a question. According to an interview that Detective Rainey told Crime Online, that the mother's behavior had been highly unusual. Do you agree with this assessment?
Oh, yeah. I mean, highly suspicious all around. I mean, there's so many things that just look strange. And I think a lot of that was that she was involved in drugs and sexual behavior that maybe she shouldn't have been either having around her son or being involved in herself. And I think that when you look at that, it seems weird. And I mean, even immediately after Robert B. dying, she goes on this incredible drug bender, and her behavior gets stranger and stranger. So I could understand 100% why people thought she might have been involved, and can still think that because the behavior is very strange.
Oh, most definitely. And there is such a thing as sexual addiction. There's also there's such a thing obviously as drug addiction. We all know. Lisa suffers obviously from some things. I'm not a psychiatrist to say what she suffers from, but I can tell you as a mother who's lost and buried a child that there is no set way to grieve. And when you find out that your child has been horrifically murdered, you don't know how you're going to react. And for her to go on this amazing drug binge that she went on, it doesn't surprise me because of the life she led that she would choose that to help ease her pain of losing him. As you said, they were close in that respect. I mean, she relied upon him and he relied as much as he possibly could upon her. She allowed him to smoke. I think that was horrible. Allowed him to do a lot of other things as well, and probably did things in front of him that no mother should ever do. And quite frankly, with all of that being said and all of the negativity around her, you don't know how you're going to react when your child dies, and in a brutal fashion especially. You just don't know what you're going to do. So we can't lie in judgment of that.
Well, I also think that she
Everybody grieves
suffered from mental
differently.
health issues too. And she was untreated for those. So she was probably self-medicating in some instances. And so to judge her for behaviors, I think that's unfair.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing is it was spice that they were using too at one point after Robert B. died. And I don't obviously never used that stuff, but it sounds like it could be pretty damaging. So I think that's another thing too, is that really picked up in her life from my understanding. And so I think it created even weirder behavior than might have been normal for a grieving mom.
And
right. Well, and I know that they
at,
vilified her for moving away, but I think maybe that was her best way to try and heal. I think you talked to her, Ash, after she had moved. She seemed to be in a better place mentally and a little bit healthier, I think.
Yeah, she did. That time, that first time I met with her, I did think she was, didn't seem on any heavy drugs. I don't know exactly what that means, but
right.
But yeah, and I mean, she was, I'm not saying I'm not a parent, so I have no judgment on this, but she was getting harassed at that house. She said people had broke into the house. Somebody, according to her, had left a frozen turkey on her counter, and it had unthawed. She had been gone for a bit in a rehab, and when it had unthawed all over the counter, so of course the house stunk. So she was saying things like that were happening. So,
and I think people just took advantage of that. They used that against her.
Yeah. And then she didn't move that far. I mean, the people make it sound like
they do. They made it sound like she moved halfway across the world. And I think she just moved across town.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, exactly. So that's another thing. I don't know how you'd react as a parent, but she didn't own the home. So, there's a lot of things involved that maybe she had to move. I don't even know.
Moving out of
Right.
where she was the best place she could have done.
I think
That
so. I
house
think
should
there was
never have
too
been
many
rented.
memories.
She shouldn't have been living there in the first place, in my
No.
opinion. So I see that as not a negative thing. Dawn says now that she wants to speak in Lisa's defense, I can tell you when she met her in March of 2017, she wasn't doing drugs. So, let's hope that she got some help, somebody that cared about helping her, because a lot of times people prey on people like this, and they want the story, they want whatever, and they don't really want to help her. And I just hope that she has been able to get help for her grief and for her addictions. But
yeah, it does. I agree with Don. It does seem like there was a period of sobriety or somewhat sobriety, or maybe if it was just prescription stuff, then it doesn't seem like, or not being misused either, obviously. But she did seem to be pretty level, although I don't know Lisa personally, so I don't know what a baseline would be, but I didn't see any strange behavior or, sweats or anything that would have led me to believe that she wasn't in a decent state. So I agree with Don on that. I don't know if that's continued, but that during that interview, I think that she was probably decently sober.
yeah. Lieber says, what has been your biggest takeaway while investigating this case?
Maybe my naivety around the cops' willingness to look at evidence, I guess, or talk to witnesses. I think that was actually mind-blowing to me. So
I was gonna say it had to be super frustrating to have a community that just, really seemed to love Bonsai and want
Hey, Shelby,
to
keep
him.
it going. I'll be right back.
Okay. Who wanted to keep him in the public eye and try and get answers, and then to have a police department that just fell so extremely short.
Yeah, I don't know. I obviously have a lot of respect for cops, so I'm sure they just know something I don't. Maybe they do know somehow Keith Brackett did it, and they do know they have the right guy in jail. I just don't know. I have such a hard time believing that, and he's
in jail on another charge, though, right? They've not actually charged him with this.
Right, but that's what, and that was one of the things that we had uncovered during our investigation, is that his sentence, he stole like a couple $1,000s worth of merchandise. Don't get me wrong, he should be charged and spend time in jail for that. And I think he got like 14 years or 18 years in jail.
Yeah.
And it just seems, and he was held on like a $500,000 bond or $750,000 bond. It just seems like there was something more at play there, but
it seems excessive. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Stealing that kind of stuff, I feel like there should be a punishment, but 18 years, that's crazy.
It is. And so I think it doesn't make sense. A lot of that doesn't add up. So one of the other questions I had was, because you get so, maybe you don't get so emotionally involved, but it appears that you do when you do these cases. How do you handle that and keep it separate?
Yeah, it is tough sometimes because it bleeds into my personal life, not even on an emotional sense, but actually into, my day to day. Like I said, even during the Robert B case, so many tips were pouring in that I was using the nights and weekends a lot of times to take in those tips.
Right.
But on an emotional side, I have a gift of being able to compartmentalize like nobody else. So I definitely am able to be like, this belongs in this box, and then this belongs in this box, and never shall the two meet. But it is hard sometimes because I even see the impact of me working on these cases on the people around me, either fearful for me or, it's a lot for them to take in some of the things I'm doing. And so that, I think, is the hardest part, is, the reaction of some of my loved ones. But I just feel like I have a gift in being able to look into these cases. I'm not afraid to ask people questions. It doesn't even dawn on me not to ask. And so I think because that seems like a gift, I feel like I should try to use it to see if there is somebody I can help, or at least, maybe if the cops don't arrest the person, at least this world knows who that person is, and they can choose if they want to be around them.
Right. Harold Haglund has a question. Do you think the cops might know who did it, but don't believe they have enough evidence to prosecute?
Yeah, that's hey Harry, that's my uncle. um,
Oh,
yes,
well, perfect.
Hey, Harry. Hi. Welcome.
Love it when the family supports.
right, absolutely. Yes, I do think that probably is it, or maybe it's even not that they don't have the evidence, but the witnesses also are very difficult in the Robert B.
Yeah.
case, because a lot of the ones that would probably know the most significant evidence don't have a good grasp on their memory of it.
Right.
And they all still, a lot of them still seem to be actively using drugs. So how do you set those people up in front of 12 jurors and have
Yeah,
the
you
jurors?
can't.
Yeah, so I think that's a huge, maybe that is why this can't ever get any further. I just wish I had seen the cops make an effort to talk to some of the witnesses we brought them.
Yeah, that to me would have been huge on their part. And the other thing too is whenever you're delving into a community that's drug ridden and this case has got drugs all around it, the witnesses, the victim, all of the drugs are around everyone. They may be very unlikely to talk to law enforcement because of that, but they'll surely talk to you because you're so forthright, forthcoming, and transparent. They don't feel a threat from you.
Yeah, I think that is, even Kira at one point, who's in the series, you could tell she was probably still dealing with drug addiction quite fiercely. And she was brave enough to go to the police station after I talked to her one day about some information she had heard. And I had a lot of respect that she morally, with the whole world she was living in, which you could tell was drug addled, and some of the people she was hanging out with, she still had the moral capacity to be like, I need to go and talk to the cops. And then she did, and it was probably a total waste. And it made me really sad that this woman, stood up and tried and still got kind of,
I
I
think
thought,
that's
pushed.
one of the things that is sad is these people put themselves out there to tell something that they feel was horrific done to a child, and they're willing to risk whatever their risk may be to do that, whether it be within the drug community itself for talking or just because they're putting themselves out to the cops. It takes a lot to stand up and do that for any of us. How many of us turn the other way when we see things that maybe or may not be something that we shouldn't be turning away from? I think we're all guilty of that to some degree. We just don't want to get involved, you know? So
Ash,
at
how
least
much
they,
do you think that this might be? Do you think that Robert was it was like an accidental death that they tried to cover up?
Yeah, I kind of got, Josh McCreary, though, doesn't have a great record there as far as, the stuff he's participated in. And so,
Right.
it could have been something more nefarious, but I think one thing that was really interesting is that accident, theory, even though someone absolutely should be held accountable in this case.
Right, yeah.
It seemed to carry on. It seemed to be embedded in the story from day one. Actually, right after I started the case, someone had messaged me this theory, and I couldn't put the pieces together because I knew so little about the case at the time. And so even all the way back to day one, somebody already had known this. And so I thought that was really interesting. And it is tough because the stories don't line up perfectly between
No.
everyone I interviewed, and that makes it tough. And maybe that is why the cops don't think that this can be solved. But the one way I think they could solve it is if they followed where that cooler went, and they did their due diligence and they talked to the witnesses we brought them, because that is really, I think, where this could be solved.
and I agree with that because
Did they ever get a cause of death? I don't think we did we?
No, not that I'm aware of.
I thought it said, I'd have to look, but I thought it was strangulation or some form of that.
Okay.
And they could tell it from the neck bones, but I'd have to look. I'd have to go back and review the autopsy stuff that we had.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that, well, maybe what the last I had heard, maybe I hadn't heard that part, that they weren't conclusive on that. But if that was the case, then the accident would not be the accident.
No, it would
If he was strangled, there
That
would
was
be
on
no
purpose.
accident. Strangulation is not an accident. But
Well, yeah, and
in
that's
that story, go ahead.
oh yeah, and that's what's interesting is what it seemed like everybody kind of said across multiple people was it started off as an accident, but they overdosed him or something, and then he ends up getting killed because the guy, they think that he's having an overdose or something's happening.
Like he fell, right? Did they talk about him falling downstairs?
Like down the stairs, yeah.
And then he was being really loud because he was obviously reacting to the drugs that he had been given. He was extremely animated or whatever and loud, and Josh did not like that and wanted him to be shut up.
Well, and yeah, that's even what they said also, is that he might have even had a seizure. So it might have been, and if they're all using drugs, it might have been something that got really heightened really fast. But, they all still need to be held accountable for whatever part they played in that.
Right. Because then I thought it was like something like, well, Josh made him shut up. So if he's the one who finally did that, then yeah, most definitely, it was a homicide.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but yeah, it's really sad. And somebody brought up in chat about the fact that the reward money is only $1,000, which was what Crime Stoppers gives for any tip or their reward, and it's a standard. And that, I think, is so telling again to Bonsai's story, because I talked about this before. In Abby and Libby's case, it's a $325,000 reward, and we have Bonsai who's $1,000. And if you don't think that it matters what your economic situation is in these cases, it does.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it just does.
100%. Like, yeah, it is interesting. It's, we often think, oh, minorities, but what it often comes down to is what's, financial kind of class, I guess, that you're in. I think that that really matters a lot, because I think, if even being a minority, if you're pretty wealthy, you're seen that way a lot of times still, and so, and if you're white and you're poor, you're seen that way. So it's like, I do think that a lot of times it has to do with socioeconomic status and not even as much with race.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, because it's like, we have here, here locally, we have Caterpillar, which is one of the largest tractor dealers, heavy earth moving equipment manufacturers in the world. And, if somebody would have gone to them, I can't imagine that they wouldn't have wanted to put up money similar to what the Colts did for the girls. It's just like, what's the problem here? It's mind-boggling to me, and it angers me.
Well, I think it wasn't in the media as much as it should have been in the mainstream media. I mean, I mention it a lot around with people I know, and they're like, "Well, who's that?" And I'm like, "What do you mean you don't know who that is?
How can you not know that? We live here. You didn't hear it. I mean, it was everywhere. We had billboards with his face on it. How could
my best friend's sitting here with me, and she this morning, she didn't know about it until today. See? When I was telling her about it, and she worked in Pekin. And I mean, that's just how it was not covered locally. There's a couple cases here locally that just have not gotten the media coverage that they deserve.
I have to plug in my laptop. I'll be right back. Sorry.
Coverage matters. We've all talked about that.
It does. It's okay, Ash. Yeah, coverage absolutely does.
The crime-fighting dog, by the way, guys.
Yes, she travels with her dog, and he helps her solve cases.
Yes, that was Clark. He went running after Mom. That's cute. But yeah, no, it definitely matters, the coverage that the cases get, for sure.
And some cases get more coverage than others. And we all know what cases those are. So
Exactly. It was cute to watch Clark jump off the couch and chase you.
It was like, hey, where's she going? Sorry, yeah,
Where's
I
Mom going?
my laptop, and it was like, you're going to die. Or battery, not me.
Exactly. Exactly. So before we let you go tonight, I want you to talk about what your next upcoming season's about, because I think it's going to be huge.
Yes. So we are definitely thinking about coming in and doing the Alexis Camry Scott case there.
are you serious?
Uh,
I
Yep.
didn't even know. Oh, that's so awesome. I work with her mom. So
Oh, nice. Yep.
Yes.
So that's still our hope. We're in the preliminary workings on it. Still want to talk to the family to make sure that they want us to look into it. But
right,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So I think that is probably going to be the one of the upcoming ones that are important to Illinois. But then the season 4 is actually Brooklyn Farthing out of Berea, Kentucky. And so that I think will be a really interesting, mind-boggling one to try to uncover there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just amazed that you're going to do Alexis's story, because Shelby and I talk about her all the time, and the fact that she's never been found, and there's people that think they know what happened to her, but I just I can't say how much it's got to be gut-wrenching for moms and for families to not be able to bring their children home.
Ooh, yeah. And then, I don't know much about that case, but it does seem like there's a lot of evidence that could probably clearly show what happened to her. And so I really kind of want to dig my teeth in and see if it is as obvious as people seem to kind of say it is online.
Well,
Well,
that's
again,
great.
it's
So when
been
you get here,
heartbreaking.
you'll have to let us know, and we'll go to lunch with you.
Oh, I
Yeah.
would love that. That'd be amazing. I'll definitely let you know.
Yeah, we would definitely love that, wouldn't we, Shelby?
Yes, absolutely. I'm here. Sorry. My teens are doing garbage day around me. So
No, that would be fantastic. So
yeah, definitely. I'll let you know. That'd be fun.
yeah, that would be great.
So.
But
again,
yeah,
and one of the Alexis Scott cases, it's heartbreaking. She was a young mom, again, an African American woman, and no one in our town is talking about her.
no.
Yeah.
The media doesn't cover her anymore. Her mom is amazing, and has vigils constantly, and just trying to keep her name in
Every once
the
in a while,
news.
you'll see little yard signs,
Yeah.
like garage sale signs, size signs stuck somewhere by the Target or a big shopping center that says, "Have you seen Alexis?" But that's about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
So she could definitely use your help. That's for sure.
it definitely could use you.
Yeah, I've heard how amazing her mom is too. So
She is.
I definitely wanted to meet and see if she thought I could help and wanted our help. So definitely we'll ask her first. So
That's awesome. I'm so excited to hear you say that. You made my night.
I know. I'm sorry that I get so excited about you covering a story. It really shouldn't be that way, but it is.
I told you we were big fans.
Yeah, no, thank you. It means so much that people care, because there are honestly days I've wanted to throw in the towel, and there have been some fans that something just was, kept me going. So it makes so much difference to what I do, because honestly, without that, it would be really hard. Like I need people being like, hey, keep going.
Keep going. Don't
going.
give up. We're all here for you. And when you have those days, you just come talk to us and we'll talk you. We'll listen.
We'll give you that ego boost that you need.
Yes, that's
give you that
exactly
boost. Because I know it's got to be even worse for you to be out there, like I said, pounding the pavement and sometimes feeling like you're hitting your head against a brick wall.
Yeah. Sometimes it feels very alone. So it's always nice to know people are watching and they care and they have questions. So
we do.
Several of our people are now subscribers to your channel too. So there you go.
Subscribing to your channel.
Thank you. I appreciate
there you
it.
go.
Because the more people
who
see, the more tips we get in, and the better chances we have of solving it. So please share the content, because honestly, that really does help us get in tips.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what's amazing. Just your story about Instagram and how you found out about Robert. To me, it shows just how small of a world social media is. what's
That's
the
amazing.
chance of a town of the size of Pekin, which is like minuscule compared to where you're from, you know, and here you get 3 people not knowing each other that respond to you. So,
well, yeah, and like think about what we could do if we worked together. You know, it would
I
be
say
amazing.
that all the time on
Yep.
YouTube. I'm like, if content creators spent more time trying to work together and collaborate, we could really make a difference, a big
My
difference
saying,
in these
teamwork
cases.
makes the dream work.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's my
So,
motto.
Daisy says to just keep swimming, Ash. Just keep swimming.
Keep it going. Just keep it going. I'll do
Just
it.
keep it going.
Yeah,
Keep it
'cause you are
going.
the
But it was
voice
wonderful
now.
having you here tonight.
Yes,
I
thank
can't say
you.
enough. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I'm in like fangirl heaven right now.
So am I.
You're like,
I'm like,
you're
oh
like
my gosh.
yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for having it on. Like it means so much to me that people want to do interviews because it helps get these stories out. And I think with that, we could maybe, you know, actually get someone put behind bars who deserves it one day.
There you
Yes,
go. That's what we're
agree.
after, right? Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll chat soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
All
See you
righty.
for
Thanks,
lunch
Ash.
when I'm in Pekin next.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow, guys. She's amazing, isn't she? I can't say enough about her. I hope you guys really enjoyed having her. Please definitely go over and subscribe if you haven't already. Watch her content. It's
And
all
don't just
very,
watch the
very
Robert
good.
B story. She's covered a couple of great stories. Like she's just
The
amazing.
Carolyn Blankenfield story of her aunt is just as incredible, and you guys all should watch that one because the work she did on that story she went way above and beyond. So
thank you,
but, I
Libra.
hope
We
you
really
guys
do like
enjoyed
her.
I really loved having her on, and I think it's important that we support these type of content creators because just like Gonzo, you guys, she's out there, you know, she's going to these crime scenes, she's going to these sites, she's interviewing people, she's doing the part that we don't get to do, and she makes a difference.
Yes, she does.
Makes a big difference.
And
But
it's like we said earlier when we were talking to her, she comes at it with such a pure look and passion that she doesn't let herself be what's the word I'm looking for? Sidetracked or whatever with things she hears or whatever. She tries to keep that focus. And I think that's what makes her separate from others.
I do. And she, like I said, she goes into a case and she doesn't go into it with an opinion one way or the other. She tries to stay, neutral, so to speak, so that she can easily follow the evidence. And I think that that's hard for some of us because we already know about some cases. We already have preconceived notions. And so that's one of the things that she does very well. Yeah, Libra, unbiased for sure. But it was great having you guys here tonight. I'm so glad that you came. I am going to end the live stream. It's been an hour and a half, and I know Shelby's got to work tomorrow. I'm sure some of you guys do too. And we've said what we've needed to say tonight. The one last thing that I do want to bring up, because I don't want to leave here without mentioning it, I hope that we all will hold the school shooting in Texas in our hearts, all of the families and the victims and their friends and their loved ones. Please say a prayer for them tonight. Those 19 individuals that lost their lives today, 18 of them being small children, absolutely broke my heart when I heard about it this afternoon. Gut-wrenching and so sad. Something needs to change in our country. We need to stop becoming hardened to these shootings and to these mass shootings to where it becomes just an everyday happenstance. It's just heartbreaking. These were elementary school children. They didn't deserve this that happened to them today. So please say your prayers and hold your children and your families close, and be safe out there. And I will talk to you guys all on Friday night. I will be live again, and I will have the captain from True Crime Garage along with Skip Jansen here to talk about Delphi. So it will be really good to see you guys then. So I look forward to seeing you guys on Friday. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.